to our panel entitled Beyond Hate Speech and Methods to Counter Fake News. As you all know, discriminative and manipulative discourse and hate speech in the media can reach many more people than discrimination in any other field due to the size of the area it permeates. Thus, its role in identity construction and prejudice formation can be much stronger. For example, in Turkey, the hashtag "We don't want Syrians" used in Twitter posts was one of the most used hashtags. And sharing misinformation and hate speech is one of the important factors in the increase of hate speech against the Syrian migrants. For example, images of Syrian trampling the Turkish flag during a protest were shared, but it was revealed that the images were taken in Iraq in 2015. The media contribute to this in different ways and even triggers anti-immigrant sentiment, such as defining Syrians with negative characteristics and words, presenting them as a problem for us, if not a threat to the nation. And the combination of presentation of the negative other and the self-serving positive presentation of us in the news is a common practice, as in all other forms in elite discourse. Therefore, in news reports, Syrians, especially the young men, are still linked to specific crimes such as aggression, extortion, rioting, theft, prostitution, and especially drugs. Or they are portrayed as victims of hate, discrimination, and murder, with undue emphasis on Syrian identity and cultural differences. As you know, polarized societies struggle even more in distinguishing false news due to the massive amount of rapidly spreading information. In times like these, any potential negative outcome and damage that disinformation can cause to democracies, economies, and human rights should be taken into consideration. Therefore, fact-checking organizations should embrace transparency as the most fundamental elements of their efforts, and financial and editorial transparency, increased engagement with followers, and the capacity to create a community will determine the fate of fact-checking platforms and societies alike. So today here we have three distinguished guest speakers in our panel. Now, I will ask two general questions to each speaker in the panel, which we will try to carry out more like a conversation. And now I'm forwarding my questions to each speaker, and starting from Katie, according to the order that was announced. Katie, and of course the others will make the tour, but I will ask 2 questions for each, so we don't have to go and come forward. How can one, Katie, here one refers to the citizen, to the public, identify fake news and misinformation within reports shared by governmental entities or shared by journalists, because it's a huge area. You could answer from which part you wish. In the media about or on refugees, and when identified as such, what does one to do to combat it is number 1 question. Number 2, I can ask now or later as you wish.
Maybe I'll focus.
You focus on the first one now. Okay, you got 3 minutes. I think it's open. It's not? Yes, yes.
Amazing. Thank you for these questions. This is such a sensitive and challenging area to focus on, and it is an area that the organization I work for, Atlas Relief and Development International, or RD, in Istanbul, where we work with Syrian refugees, has really worked hard to address in close collaboration with a group of Syrian refugee women. And really, when we conduct surveys, when we ask people from the community about these challenges, the vast majority have told us directly that they have experienced forms of hate speech, forms of misinformation about their communities, and they've even seen such information shared in official reports from governmental entities, from INGOs, from local civil society organizations as well. So it's really a prominent challenge, and I think a lot of times it comes down to these entities not having a direct connection with the local communities themselves. There's a lot of information that gets shared that is not really relevant to the experiences that people face because, for example, they're not speaking directly to the communities. They don't have a relationship, a trusting relationship where they will hear the realities that people are facing on the ground. And so when this does happen, sometimes it can be really a big challenge in terms of trust. There's issues among the refugee community we support where they don't feel that they can trust services or resources coming from governmental or INGO entities because it's not truthful to their experience, or it doesn't truly reflect the needs that they have on the ground. And this is a really big challenge. When it comes to supporting the communities we work with, we provide training, we provide capacity building to help people understand what tools, what resources there are available to be able to look at resources from a critical eye, be a critical consumer of media, of news, of resources, but also be a conscientious sharer of that information and really understand when and where and what information should be then shared with the communities so that they're playing a role in supporting their neighbors, their families with information that is valid, that is helpful. And then when it comes to the organizational side, we really try to work to bridge the gap between the community and change actors, change makers, so that when a government entity or an INGO wants to create a policy that is rooted in their understanding of the refugee experience, they have a chance to speak directly with communities that it would affect. And even though that seems quite obvious, that often doesn't happen. So playing that role of bridging the gap is really important.
Yeah, thank you. And how can civil society disseminate the real stories and news to those who may be misinformed?
Another great question. I have 2 examples for this. Currently, we're working on a project that is collaborating with the Hayat Women's Collective. And this is a collective of Syrian refugee women who are working with RD to implement activities, some of which are focused directly on addressing hate speech and discrimination, and also online radicalization and disinformation issues. And some of the ways that they have chosen to address this challenge is to do a few different things. First of all, they're working to really change the perception of what a refugee is in the media. How are refugees portrayed? And oftentimes that really comes from a victim's mentality. There's a lot of refugees that are portrayed as dependent on the government for their funding. They're very poor. These people are not contributing to the community, to the society. But in reality, as I would hope we all know, that is really truly not the case. And refugee communities have so many assets to share with their communities as well as with the host community in which they live. So helping to represent more truthful identities from the community themselves has been a really effective method that our women's collective have worked to use. And in addition, we've also worked inside of Syria to help support minority groups inside of the country, across the country, to also represent their true experiences and perspectives. And we've helped to amplify that within the community as well as to connect them with international change makers so that perceptions about who they are, what they need, and also to combat governments or INGOs or other entities that would like to co-opt those experiences and use them for their own benefits. They can really have those perceptions changed from the voices of the people themselves. I think that's really important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for the time management. John, should I repeat the questions again? Or?
Well, I think one of the questions was, how can people recognize when there is misinformation
That's right.
coming their way? Sure. But anyway, first, teşekkür ederim. And I'm really very happy to be here. I have to tell you, as listening to your answer, Katie, and I say, boy, are we working in very different areas, because I'm a journalist. I work with a fact-checking news service called Polifact, and your issue here is refugees. We have some issue with refugees as well, but the big issue for us is immigrants and immigration. Just to give you an idea of what we do is, we take specific claims from all sorts of people, politicians for sure, people in the media, and organizations, and we identify specific claims, and then we just judge very analytically how accurate the claim is, how close to reality does this claim come, and then we rate them. We have a little bit of fun. We have something called the truthometer. So it goes from true to half true, well, mostly true, half true, mostly false, false. And then I do want to just simply say our lowest rating is called pants on fire, which for those of you who know English, this is an old children's rhyme, liar, liar, pants on fire. So we don't call people liars, but we say their claim is pants on fire. Anyway, just to give you an idea of the volume and the nature of our work, let's see if we can show that first slide and see if it shows up. There we go. Great. Thank you so much. And you can see that if you take a look at the number of claims, we've got about 1,100 or so that we have checked. We do place a priority on correcting bad information. That's more important to do. But nevertheless, you see that a good 3/4 of the claims that we check are at best half true, which is going to be misleading in its own sense, or really much worse than that. So it's a very common problem that we're dealing with. Now, here's one of our tips we say for anyone on the street. The first indication that you are seeing some misinformation is that it brings an emotional reaction. This is the immediate red flag, because people who are sharing misinformation want to get your attention, and they therefore will push your emotional buttons. So that if you see, if anyone sees a piece of information that, gives you this emotional response, then there is a real chance that it is inaccurate. Because someone was trying to get a reaction out of you. Now, there are other steps that you can take once you notice that to follow through and determine where is this information coming from. And so you have to use a certain amount of critical thinking. So the first thing is the emotional response, and the second one is calm down. Take a closer look and judge who is making this statement, who wants to share this information, who's behind it. And then you can go further. We have an entire program in my broader organization in media literacy, which shows people step by step how they can take the specific claim and say, okay, has this shown up anyplace else? Have other people looked at this particular claim and found that it was wrong? So very quickly, people, especially people who are on their web browsers, can begin to see where there is misinformation. That is, for us, I think, really important. But, in a way, I'm a little bit envious of you because you get to engage with people directly. You get to be a real activist. We are more neutral. We put the information out there, and then we do everything we can to make sure that it reaches more people. But at the end of the day, we are just simply, we put it out there, and then we wait and see.
Okay, thank you. You almost, I think, answered the second question, but would you like to add something? How can civil society disseminate the real stories and news to those who may be misinformed?
Let me just give one little example.
Okay.
Obviously, everything we do is set up to be shared quickly through social media. We want people to share information. But we have one partnership that I think has been very interesting in terms of its results, and that's a partnership with Facebook. Now, people can be very critical of Facebook, and they should be, but our partnership with Facebook involves us checking posts that appear on Facebook. And then our results are sort of embedded into the Facebook post so that when people come to that post, they have an opportunity to see our fact check. And the reason I want to mention this in particular is that this has put us in touch with many more people who we were not reaching before. Just as an example, before the partnership, we got maybe 4 million people a year coming to our fact checks through Facebook, so we can trace that digitally. After the partnership, that number went up to 20 million in a year. And those were people we weren't reaching before. And I think that that's really the challenge. There's lots of people we can reach, but we need to reach new people.
Thank you very much. And Tirşe?
At first, maybe we need to think about what is misinformation, disinformation, and fake news. Yes, we use mostly fake news, but fake news might be only an umbrella term. And about refugees, mostly we are talking about disinformation, not misinformation, because here in Turkey we see lots of, misinformation. They look like misinformation, but sometimes people purposely missing something, and it became disinformation at this point because they are purposely doing it. They are purposely producing this kind of information. What kind of information we are seeing here in Turkey, it's really important because mostly people see refugees as a threat, and like economical and administrative threats, or educational threats, or a religious threat, or something like this, they see them. And there are some, like, for example, refugees got getting some amount of money from the government, or like they have some privileges at hospitals, or they have some privileges at universities, or those kind of information people spreading. So there are some different systems, but here when people who disseminate this kind of information, when they try to give information, they misjudge it, and according to their misjudgment, they give this information. And this is disinformation at this point. And when we see this kind of information, what we need to do, it is really important, because at first we need to think about who is sharing it. Like if Ümit Özdağ sharing it, we shouldn't believe in it, because sometimes mostly for Ümit Özdağ is the leader of Victory Party, and he used a lot of information about refugees and spread so many disinformation about refugees. It's a part of his campaign, by the way, and he used it a lot. But there are so many other politicians, they are using it a lot, especially, by the way, all the research show us during the election times, people tend to use this kind of information because it is, as you know, a part of propaganda campaign to create a common enemy, and refugees are the potential common enemy, and so people don't hesitate to use refugees as part of their campaign, and they use it. So for this reason, when we see some kind of information, at first we need to think about who is sharing it. This is really important. And in which context they are sharing it. At this point, we need to think about it's true or not. If it is not true, we need to be aware of something. If we click it, we will make people see this content more, so we shouldn't click it. We shouldn't, in a way, react those kind of content. And on the other hand, yes, this third-party fact-checking is really working of Facebook. But on the other hand, for example, here in Turkey, we know that this is something that we name, yes, audience loyalty. And people, mostly these people, don't believe in these organizations. They criticize those organizations as well, some people. So for this reason, audience loyalty is really important. I think here non-governmental organizations or those fact-checking organizations should work more. And on the other hand, why they are sharing it? This is really important. We say that, yes, politicians sharing it. And on the other hand, it is unfortunately, some people share those kind of content just for the profit. For example, once upon a time when we conduct a research with Dr. Can Ertuğ, we saw that there is a fake Facebook account, and it's regularly sharing disinformation about refugees. And the moderator of the account was asking people, if you have this kind of information, please send it to us because we will share it. And all of those contents were promoted. So this is really interesting. So it's for the profit they are sharing it. They don't care about refugees. So for this reason, the context is really important. And who is sharing is really important. We need to be really critical. Maybe it might be my answer.
Okay, thank you. So, Katie, I have a question for you. How do you evaluate the impacts of hate speech and discrimination within Istanbul's refugee and host communities, as well as among IDP communities across Syria, and maybe another one, you'll answer them together. Could you please tell us about the unique experiences with fake news and disinformation faced by refugees and tactics to address fake news, disinformation that ARDI and CPS have used to address the challenge in collaboration through your project to establish capacity state, and you just mentioned about fund projects through the Hayat women's collective that address discrimination hate speech and disinformation, fake news. Maybe some you would like to focus on the gender dynamics, etc. Just
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yes. So when we initially began our programming in Istanbul, we of course began with a really in-depth needs assessment. We wanted to reach a wide variety of diverse refugees or people under protected status in Turkey to really understand what challenges they were facing, what needs they have that were not being addressed. And really within the context of this project, we were aiming to address some of the root causes of potential extremism or radicalization that were really rooted in issues related to social instability or unaddressed needs. And what we found from the findings was that challenges around misinformation, challenges around online radicalization, these issues were really a part of challenges related to hate speech and discrimination that refugees were feeling and experiencing quite often, not only from the host community, but also within their own communities as well, because obviously refugees are a very diverse group of people. It's not only Syrians, it's not only Arabic speakers, but there's a wide variety of people, and even among the Syrian community, there's a wide variety of different minority groups or different people from diverse regions of the country. So it's not one single group of people. And one of the challenges that a lot of the people we spoke with highlighted was that misinformation being shared from the host community, but also among their own communities, were really driving a lot of fear and a lot of isolation. And we're really exacerbating a lot of the other challenges that they faced. And not only was this happening online, but of course also in person. In 2019, as I'm sure many of us remember, there was heightened challenges when it came to misinformation being shared that was not only an issue online, but was acted out in violence on the street. Refugee communities were really affected by stores and homes being burnt down, by rioting, by violence. So when you think about the impact that misinformation, disinformation can have, it doesn't just stay online and affect the psyche of the person, but it can really take a physical form as well. And so these were really challenges we wanted to address, and the project is a fairly small initiative in terms of the work that the women were each doing. There's the Women's Collective, the Hayat Women's Collective, had funding and support from ARDI to implement small community-based initiatives, and some of the activities that they chose to work on when it comes to addressing disinformation, misinformation, were to impact the youth. So one initiative that they worked on was to bring together Turkish youth and Syrian youth and hold a game show competition where they had moderators who would bring up some key forms of misinformation, such as refugees receive tons of money from the government, or Syria is a safe place to be, why are you not going back home? And other challenges that were really prominent online at the time. And they allowed the different contestants to share their experiences. Why did they believe such a thing? Where were they hearing this? And then through this game show initiative, they were able to hear really the truth of the situation, both in terms of facts, but also the perspectives from both sides. And they had a platform to share those perspectives with each other in a moderated, safe space where it's okay if you had a misconception. You're here to learn what the reality is, not only from the fact-checked information, but also from the perspective of the other group that you may not have ever heard before. So that was a really impactful initiative that the women led and facilitated and will be continuing in the future. And they really felt passionately about addressing youth and making sure youth were engaged. And then the other side of this was really to work online. And obviously these projects were conducted during the pandemic, so really in-person initiatives were not possible at the time. They will be in the future, hopefully, but they did a lot of dialogue sessions where they were able to bring people together and learn about hate speech, about fake news, about disinformation, misinformation. What is the difference, as you highlighted, and where can they find real information, such as the organization that you run, these sources and resources are available and they need to be shared, and tools and skills to really identify as a consumer of media, as a sharer of news and media, how do you address these things and how do you be conscious about what you're sharing and what you're consuming. So those were some of the initiatives that were led through the Hayat Women's Collective and will be continuing. And then I'm forgetting what else you had asked. Did I miss saying something? Maybe just from a gendered perspective, because our organization really emphasizes a gender lens across all of our work. So one of the things that the Hayat Women and ARDI highlighted was just about the specific experiences that women and other gender minority groups were experiencing when it came to hate speech and discrimination. And oftentimes women especially have such an outward symbolic identity when it comes to being from the Syrian community. Not everyone, of course, but many of them look a certain way in terms of clothing or in terms of presentation. So oftentimes refugee women were telling us that they were being targeted, especially because of how they looked, or because of them as women were being blamed, like, why are you not helping your family integrate more? You know, you should be helping your children learn Turkish. Why are you not speaking Turkish, for example? So we found that women not only were targeted quite often as females, but also as someone that kind of was holding the identity of the refugee on the streets, for example. It was a really big challenge that many women shared with us, and they were also being almost playing this double burden of not only working to integrate and also dealing with hate speech, discrimination, misinformation being shared about themselves, but also they were being engaged in projects from organizations alone. You know, women were being engaged for these projects. They were being taught new skills about how to identify misinformation and hate speech, but then they were going home and having this double burden of then needing to teach their families and help their families understand everything, which is both a wonderful opportunity to do so, but it's also an extra burden that they had to hold and had to be responsible for. So just to say that we're really conscious of the gendered perspective and the gendered dynamic when it comes to hate speech, and trying to make sure that our projects were designed in a way that would not place extra burden on people.
Thank you so much. John, Polifact, the fact-checking news service, has examined over 1,000 claims related to immigration, and over half have been mostly false or worse. What are the main themes that show up in the false claims? How do these circulate? How do they reach people? Access? Who are the worst offenders, maybe? And what have you done to block their spread? Thank you.
Sure. So we were talking among ourselves before the panel began, and it's really amazing that when it comes to hate speech and misinformation about refugees or immigrants, there is no creativity. Let me give you 3 quick examples of the themes that we see again and again. Let's go to another slide. Theme that these people are criminals. There we have a claim from Donald Trump, talking about human trafficking and drugs. I can't tell you the number of times that we check claims that are associating immigrants with drugs and crime, again and again and again. And you, in your work, in your lives, no matter what you're looking at, you know, this whole business of treating people as other, different, dangerous, this is one of the most common themes. Another slide, another theme. They are taking something away from you, right? And this is something that shows up on Facebook. We've seen it from politicians. This is American citizens pay $155 billion a year to make sure that illegal immigrants are taken care of better than American citizens. This is the whole psychology of like, these people are, it's unfair. You're all waiting in line for something good, and they get in front of you in line. And guess what? You are paying for it, right? These are powerful emotional messages, and we see them again and again. When I get to one of our prime offenders, he specializes in all of them. Last one, please. That they're unclean. This is a really deep-seated belief that in this particular case, because of the pandemic, Joe Biden has driven this current coronavirus surge because he imported more virus from around the world by having a wide open southern border. So this whole just fundamental gut feeling that these people are unclean is so destructive, so common. We see it again and again. And you asked me, who are some of the worst offenders? In this area, America has an ace. We have a king, and his name is Tucker Carlson, and he is on Fox News. And Fox News is our conservative broadcasting or cable news network. And he is so effective at hitting all of these themes again and again and again, and his show has the highest audience of any of the cable news programs. That's not all news programs, but I just cannot underemphasize how dangerous it is. He reaches millions of people every night with these themes, and all it does is inflame the negative attitudes towards immigrants. So what can we do? Well, you know, we will just fact check and fact check and fact check. And it is good when we do something through Facebook because there's a multiplier effect that any claim that we find to be incorrect on Facebook, then we feed that back into the Facebook's algorithm so that all claims like that are similarly flagged. And Facebook also just dramatically pulls back the spread of those particular posts. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, that doesn't stop the spread, right? It slows it down. And then there are other claims that come along on top of it. It is a never-ending battle. So we cannot block it. What I see us doing more than anything else is we give people hard facts that they can use in their lives, in their interactions with others, so that we give them a little more power to push back. And if we're able to do that, and we reach millions of people too, then maybe we're sort of holding the line against this kind of misinformation.
Thank you so much. And Tirşe, your question is, you have mentioned in your article called Sarcasm Beyond Hate Speech, Facebook comments on Syrian refugees in Turkey, that some comments in Facebook towards refugees cannot simply be considered as innocent jokes and are indeed part of a vicious cycle of violence and function like hate speech and discriminatory rhetoric. Can you share your outputs from your research, please.
Of course. At first, we need to define what is vicious cycle of violence. According to Johan Galtung, there are two forms of violence, indirect one and direct one. Direct one is very simple. If you beat someone, this is direct violence, isn't it? So if you kill someone, this is direct violence. It is working in that way. But the indirect one is really interesting because here we see that the two forms of violence, the cultural one and the structural one. The cultural one is this, like all those false information that we spread about refugees, or all those disinformation that we talk about. All of them are a part of cultural violence, because here what we do in a way, via sharing it, via people share it, more people will see it, and at the end it will in a way make some people believe in those lies, and it will create a kind of ideology, and people maybe will act discriminatively. So it will function in that way. But here, the cultural violence also affects the structural one. Like, for example, if we think about what happened during the pandemic, like the example that you show us, in many other countries, they determine refugees as potential COVID-19 carriers, and it caused some illegal pushbacks in Greece and in Italy and in many other countries. So, and it caused that, by the way. So this is the structural one. If they started to, all those governments started to do some acts, and if they legalize it, for example, if they don't accept refugees force in a way to some hospitals, or if they ban refugees to live in some part of the countries, and it happens here in Turkey, by the way, so it is the structural one. And Galtung says this, the structural one and the cultural one eventually will cause a direct violence, so it will create a vicious cycle of violence. And here is when we define the sarcasm as a cultural violence, as a form of cultural violence, we try to underline this information, because here we see that it is really hard to detect sarcasm or those kind of language in a way. And via sentiment analysis, so many researchers are doing some research on Twitter, on other social media platforms, but it is really hard to detect those kind of language. Because, for example, if I would like to give an example. Here they are saying that if you like to come, you are welcome to come, but when you come, you will see what you deserve. It is really hard to detect this kind of language, because there is no insult. They don't use any, you know, like they don't dehumanize in a way people, etc., etc. For this reason, and people, the problem is this: people react like via smileys and all, like liking, etc. They react to those kind of content. And when they react, as you know, all those platforms try to optimize the time that we spend on those platforms. When they react, other people will see it, and maybe we will see similar kind of content, and we will continue to see similar ones, etc., etc. And it will eventually cause a kind of violence, and it will cause a vicious cycle, etc., etc. So it is working in that way.
Thank you. So my questions are all, but here I think it's much more important for you, the audience, who would like to ask questions to our distinguished guests. First of all, thanks very much. I was very much pleased to moderate this, our talk, as John said. It was a wonderful talk. And now let's get questions from you.
Hi, and thank you for the really interesting panel and really interesting topic. I had a question probably mostly for Tirşe Hoca. Looking at a model like Polifact, it's clear that that's rooted in an American context. It focuses mostly on information in English, and as far as I know, most similar efforts, most of the work that's gone into moderating platforms like Facebook focuses primarily on English, and as bad as disinformation in English is, most evidence shows that in all other languages it's worse. And I'm wondering, what kind of infrastructure is there like that in Turkish, or what would it take to build something like that? And do you think that's even the most effective approach? Oh.
If there is a similar organization in Turkey, as there is. Of course, here they are. Am I right?
You make the event. Okay. Here we have someone. We have a similar organization. They are working as a party fact-checking organization for Facebook, T-Talk, and they do a really great job. And on the other hand, but the problem is this. Yes, they really work hard, but on the other hand, platforms are really working hard as they are. I am not sure about it. I need to criticize a little bit platforms. For example, when we see, for example, several times I warned Facebook about something, like I say that this is hate speech or this is disinformation. And they say that according to our policy, it is not hate speech. It's obviously hate speech, but they say that it is not hate speech. So for this reason, they warn them. I know it because we talk about it. Always we are talking about it, and they warn them. But sometimes, most probably, they tell them it is maybe not like false, or it will stay here for a while, or something like this. For this reason, platforms is something else. But on the other hand, I think this program is really great. Okay, third-party fact-checking is really great, by the way, because anyway, they try to consult these organizations. Yes, we have several organizations. Maybe we may. Gülüm, would you like to talk about it? Yeah.
Hi, maybe I can also mention about, actually this kind of partnership with social media platforms is really good, but of course it's not enough, because actually platforms should just see fact-checking organizations separate than the content moderation. We are doing more than this. Fact-checking is a kind of a hard work, and it's actually mostly included something like journalism inside, and actually factual information, as like Tirşe Hoca mentioned, affects people's lives. So we have to do more than actually moderating these kind of platforms. And like our organizations, Tate.org, we are also trying to do empowering the media literacy in the society. So it's not the only way to working with the platforms is just a way for being successful. So it's a huge problem. So there are many dimensions inside this problem. So and when again we back to the platforms, maybe you know, because you mentioned about the Polifact, there are many fact-checking organizations wrote a letter to YouTube, for example, a few months ago, say that you should do something on your platform. But actually, last week I was in Oslo for Global Fact conference, and the YouTube person said that I appreciate your approach, but yeah, we are trying to do our best, but they really try to their best. But at the end, we never see such an effort in many platforms. But at least Facebook try to do something, TikTok try to do something. So we really understand their efforts, but we need more than this, and we need more concrete and broad approach to fight against this information problem, because it's more than this, and media literacy, I think, the most important part of this fight against this information.
Can I just jump on with just one additional thing, is that we also have a partnership with TikTok, and that's a really important place for us to be. And obviously, it reaches a lot of young people, but it reaches people of all ages now. So you need to be engaged with the popular platforms and hope for cooperation. And TikTok, I think, has been pretty good.
Any other questions? No? Everybody is satisfied with our talk. So, yes?
I'd like to add something else. I forgot to add this, by the way. According to our research, 10% of comments were sarcastic. It's really interesting, isn't it? Think about it. Via sentiment analysis or AI, we try to detect some hatred, rhetoric, or discriminatory language, or false information, but it is almost impossible to detect 10% of those comments. It's really interesting. I wanted to add this information as well. 10%. 11, actually. 11% of, according to our research, comments were sarcastic.
Wow, they don't talk to me. About 50% of my comments are sarcastic.
Okay, if there are no other more questions, I'm closing the session. Thank you so much for all of you for your interest and your participation, and hope to see you in another panel. Thank you.